east side of Buffalo, and understanding the prevalence of chronic disease, such as diabetes, hypertension, heart disease, and then comparing that to white people who live outside of that, outside of those zip codes. We have found that African Americans will have a 300%, that's right, 300% higher rate of prevalency for chronic disease than if you were white and lived not in that community. And this can materialize into 10 to 12 lost years of life. And so when you're thinking about the importance of wisdom, knowledge that's transferred from generation to generation, many in the African American community are not benefiting from the knowledge and wisdom of our elders because they're physically just not there. And then backtracking all the way back to where does it start? Well, it starts in utero, right? And so some of the worst maternal health outcomes, again, are found in the African American community, where in fact, if you are an African American woman that has education and insurance and all the things that people work so hard for, you're still going to have worse health outcomes than a white woman that has no education and is living in poverty. And so we're dedicated at the Buffalo Center for Health Equity to eliminate race-based health disparities by focusing on policy, research, community engagement, neighborhood development and advocacy, focusing on the social determinants of health. And so we're excited about the work that we're doing. It's generational work, so I'm under no illusion that if we were sitting in this room years from now, I can report to you that everything, everything's great, that we got diabetes, hypertension control, we got it all under control. But it's generational work that we have to start, and we have to start doing it the right way, looking at root causes. And so that's my story.
Okay, I'm Joe Anderson Jr., Director of Technological Innovation at Cornell University's ILR Criminal Justice Employment Initiative, and co-founder of 2 Justice Technology startups. You can't hear me? Sorry about that. Co-pilot Dreamers and Resme. So I guess what brings me to this work, building like software and other technologies for justice impacted individuals, about 77 million in this country, is I was formerly incarcerated. So as like a youth, me and my brother happens to be there too, so he escaped as well. Spent about 10 years each inside of various juvenile and correctional facilities. Ended up, pursuing business, entrepreneurship, and education as a means to get out of there. So I joined Cornell University's prison education program. Got out about 6 years early. Went to Cornell for a bit. Transferred to Stanford. Lots of school pride there. And joined clearly, right? I have Cornell socks on too.
He does.
Big red. And had joined a number of early stage venture-backed startups. That's just my educational experience out there. And then decided to use that knowledge and start building technology for just the community, helping people access jobs and education. And so that's our main objective, and then also doing a bit of ecosystem development. So bringing in startups, bringing in companies, increasing the capacity of the workforce to be ready for the future that we hope to create, in tandem.
Hey everyone, my name is Tori Kuper. I am the founder and board member of Cooperation Buffalo, also joined here by our board president and executive director in the crowd. Yeah. Catherine and Andrew. I also run the School for Democratic Management at the Democracy at Work Institute. How I came into this work, I grew up in a low-income community. My dad came here as an immigrant, faced a lot of barriers to work. Mostly grew up with my mom, who was a single mama and was an educator in Rochester, actually, in School 17. All right. Love Rochester. Karen Cosmos, retired about 10 years ago. Growing up, it became really clear in my own home and in my community that the economy was not built to benefit people like us, and it was not meant to advance people like us. And I watched, as I got older, all of my friends giving up the things that they loved to get jobs where they were exploited and they were treated really poorly. I did have the benefit of an amazing education that I just before the first recession of our generation in 2008, and learned really quickly that the narrative I had been fed of the pathway to security and the pathway to success, those rules didn't apply anymore. It wasn't going to happen through a corporate trajectory. It wasn't at that time going to happen through even like a nonprofit trajectory or academia. There was no clear pathway for success and stability, and that we needed to build the model and a system that worked for us. I came to Buffalo in 2009, fell in love with Buffalo, found it was just a city of incredible creativity, ingenuity, mutual support, and mutual aid, and anyone who had a dream, you could find a friend who had a hammer and you could build something really great with it. And so with that incredible community and incredible collaboration, I moved to Digital City Housing Co-op, learned a lot about democratic ownership and cooperative ownership, and I was like, oh, this is a pathway where like people like me with my background can own something and can own something with people. Through that, found worker ownership, and with an incredible community, we built Bread Hive, which is now 10 years old, has 10 worker owners. So both like setting industry standards for labor as well as project standards for like real good bagels. You can have both. And around that time, folks started coming to us like, how did you do this? How can I start a worker-owned business? And I was like, I can't talk about it. I'm making 1,000 bagels today. But got together with Andrew Del Monte, who is at the Small Business Development Center, housed here at Buff State, Harbor Bishop, who is also an amazing leader in our community, and we started Collaboration Buffalo, bringing technical assistance, access to capital, access to legal support and development, to build worker-owned businesses for folks who are generally excluded from economic opportunity, and figuring out how can we make business, how can we make capital, something that supports our community, supports our determination, and doesn't exploit the people who make this city great.
Hello everyone, such a blessing to be here. I am Kim Smith, coming out of Rochester, political director with Vocal New York. I will always say that first, and city council member with Rochester City Council. And I like to think of my journey as my path from pain to power. I came up in deep poverty, and if any of you know anything about poverty, you know that it is not just a temporary financial setback. There's a lot of trauma that happens in poverty. And so as I was coming up, I had like no aspirations of what I was going to be when I grew up, because I couldn't see life that far. And so I said, all I know is that I want to be there to help people and make life different so people won't have to go through this. And so at a very young age, I got a job at the county health department at the ground level doing outreach, knocking on people's door, testing them for lead poisoning, right? And that felt good. It felt like I was doing something. I was in like low income neighborhoods, with my people. And as I would knock on doors, asking these folks if they had kids 6 and under who could be tested for lead, they were like, come on in, but they had no furniture for me to sit on. And they said, I'm so glad that you're here and you're working for the health department because we have no food. So I went back to my boss and I said, I need to go out with some referrals. And she says, yeah, there's lots going on in the community, but giving referrals is not your job. And I thought, okay, this isn't the job for me. So I said, maybe I need to do case management. So I became still in the health department, moved up a little bit, and got a job in case management. So in case management, now I can work with these people who didn't have any furniture and any food and give them referrals. But why was it that as I'm giving these referrals, people aren't connecting? There are waiting lists. People are not eligible. And it was because of these policies and practices, so I said, okay, my work isn't in case management. And so I went back to school, got my master's in public administration, and moved up in the county, and I become this person working on policy. And as I'm sitting at the table with all of these white people, and we're talking about policy and how are we going into this immunization center because parents haven't done the right thing and gotten their kids vaccinated. So we need to look at the CPS policies and we need to strengthen them. And I'm like, are you people freaking kidding me? You know? And so, yeah. A little re-stimulation there. But anywho, as I am writing policy, and my boss is like, Kim, I'm going in your office and you're never there. I need you for meetings. And I'm like, you told me to write policy. Well, where are you? I'm in the community, working with the community, trying to write this policy. And she says, that's not how you do it. She said, our local policy has to mirror that of state legislation. And I looked at state legislation and I thought, how crappy is this?
Yeah.
And so I got discouraged. I was always unhappy. Someone sent this job announcement and they said, hey, you know, there's this radical group looking to hire an organizer. And if you want to get rid of some of your staff, give them this job announcement. I printed that job announcement, took it home to my partner, Robin, and I said, Robin, it's a pay cut. I don't know what the future is. I'm stepping out tired of the retirement system, but this feels right. She said, so do it. And so I left. I joined Voices of Community Activists and Leaders, where we fight against ending homelessness, mass incarceration, the war on drugs, HIV, and it has been the happiest time of my life. As we fight for better state legislation, and as we are protesting, we were winning, but not winning enough. And so Vogel said, Kim, you must run for office. And I resisted every step of the way, but now that I am here, it's all about working with and building and developing our people on the outside as we also plant people on the inside to penetrate the system to create a just democracy.
Panelists today. I'm almost like speechless a little bit, but I'm a moderator, so let me talk. Just you mentioned a lot of the barriers and and what the current issues are that really are holding back a large portion of the population from feeling the benefits, like I said, of economic development, of opportunity. We just came from a panel that talked about all these benefits and tax abatements for, big corporations to come in and they're supposed to bring us jobs and all of our lives are supposed to be happy, and it never works that way, right? And so I'm switching the order a little bit here, but I want to know exactly what is your work of creating and reimagining democratic workplaces or a democratic economy? How can we combat narratives or the current status quo so that we can create accessibility, mobility, and stability for our communities specifically? Not for the people already making the money, not for the corporations stability, not for even the economy stability, but even though once we give ourselves stability, the economy will also be stable. But how are we bringing that actually down and not a trickle down way? And I don't know who wants to start with that. We can take a pause. We could go the other way, but we can also popcorn. It doesn't have to go in linear all the time. Go ahead.
My thoughts here on democracy, at least in terms of bringing opportunity to the community, is to leverage, I think, the nature of companies to maximize profits, right? And being competitive, at least on the national scale. We realize there's a huge portion of our population that just isn't competitive and just aren't participating, and that has a negative effect on GDP. Whether we care about that or not, I think the businesses do, or will, as you see other countries kind of leapfrog us. And so what we've seen in the engineering context is companies, at least in startups, that are highly competitive, and so they're looking for talent that is non-traditional, right? They're actually doing it, right? So individuals who are either neurodiverse, individuals who are not the kind of frat bros that always, positions, or the Wall Street bros, and then people who are formerly incarcerated. experiences. They're going to build different products. They're going to have different approaches. And because those companies are so competitive, they actually take bets, right, on this kind of non-traditional talent. And that's where we've seen the most traction. But only for those, companies and entities that are actually, trying to maximize profits in every single way.
I'm curious on what industries do you feel like are taking those bets? Is it tech and all those big ones? Yeah. How do you think we can shift other industries to also take those same bets?
Yeah, I think technology is like inventing something that doesn't exist, like a future that doesn't exist. Whereas you have the blue chip companies, they've been living off of glory days of America forever, right? And even in the other panel, there's no incentive for them to change, or even politics, right? Whereas truly disruptive companies disrupt laws, they do everything differently, right? And so I think it's in their DNA to kind of maneuver in that fashion.
I think it's interesting when we talk about democracy, right? We live in a democracy, we are a democratic country, and what that means is that we get voice and vote. So you get voice and power and control over the decisions that directly affect you and your families. But we kind of check that every day when we walk into work, right? When we walk into work, we have our bosses who control the conditions, and we can become part of unions, and that helps us build power, get a seat at the table. We can be in maybe participatory workplaces that give us a seat on the board, or ESOPs that help us share in profits. But at the end of the day, we need to be really expanding the little d democracy. When we see traditional corporations, Wall Street is growing exponentially, but we are up to, but wages are not. So currently, CEOs are making 352 times the lowest paid worker. In worker-owned businesses, that ratio caps out about 1.43 to 1. So within worker-owned businesses, if the amount of value you're creating directly benefits you. So if your company produces a profit, that profit is distributed equitably back to the workers, not to the shareholders. So it's creating real economic wealth. And on top of that, these workers are getting actual voice and vote over the strategic direction of the company, over the conditions of the workplace, over how childcare is treated, how paternal leave is treated. During COVID, we saw worker-owned businesses were actually far more resilient and fared better than conventional businesses, because they democratically decided, no, we're not going to shut down the business because this is our livelihood. We're not going to pursue layoffs because these are also owners, but we're going to find creative solutions. We're going to do market pivots. We're close to the market, and we know the decisions that will yield the best results. We will all take furloughs, we will all take wages. So those businesses not just survived, but they were more resilient and they bounced back faster. And so I think we need to be investing, it makes sense as a democratic nation to invest in democratic businesses that have built-in resilience, that didn't just prove their worth during COVID, but also showed, the economic recession in Argentina in 2001. We've seen massive recessions in Europe, and these worker-owned businesses and economies always survive. So I think, we have so much more crisis that is coming for us, and we need to stop investing. These companies are fragile, and they constantly rely on bailouts. So we need to be investing in resilience, and this democratic businesses are a resilient model.
Yeah, I think one of the things I want to, knowledge is so powerful, and I think if we want to really build a serious movement, we have to be a lot more knowledgeable and have a lot better understanding of how the economy works and how power is gotten in this country. And I think that when we have conversations about how we want to change things, we have to start with, what are we really trying to change? Do you really understand what we're trying to change? And I get it. I get the conversations about dismantling the capitalist system and all this other stuff. But in the reality, that's not gonna happen. It's just not. And so what we have to do is figure out ways, like my sister here, to understand how the economy works, and then make it work for you. And then make it work for the people that you're trying to serve. As it relates to policy, 62%, what is that number, 62%? You might know? 62% is what the federal government budget is on the military. Right? And so this country spends just a ridiculous amount of money on how to kill people. And we need to build a kind of democratic movement to push back against this stuff. Right? And so when they say to you, you know, that there's not money to do things that we need to do for people in our community, that's a lie. Whenever the system tells you there's no money, they are lying. What they're saying is there's no money for you or for the things that you're important to you, right? And so we have to have a better understanding of how systems work, understand about power, how to get power, and how to really understand the needs of the people that we're trying to serve. We have to spend more time doing things like this: organizing, information, community engagement, so that people have a better understanding. And I get it. I mean, when people are trying to just survive, to keep your head above water, when you're just trying to get your bills paid, make sure your children are taken care of, to say, oh, well, I need you to come and sit in a meeting for a couple of hours to talk about how we can change the economic structure of your neighborhood, your community, right? That's going to be a kind of a tough sell at times. But we have to keep at it and keep at it. And then once people recognize there's value for my presence being in this room and how I can contribute to a solution to make my life better and the lives of my neighbors, then we can build stuff. Don't let folks tell you that you don't have power, you can't do anything, oh, it's just a meeting, you're wasting your time. It's not. Then final thought, read. I'm always amazed that every year during the King holiday, right, and people will have great performance about how they're connected to the work of Dr. King, but have never read the book, Where Do We Go From Here? And if you haven't read that book, Where Do We Go From Here, which was his last book, and the book that I would argue that got him killed, he begins to start talking about these structural and systemic changes. He starts to talk about how we really have to organize around issues around human rights and economic structures and pushing against militarism and all these other things. And then that gives us a framework of knowledge, so that when we come together, we're coming together with a purpose and an understanding that we can make this change. But if we're just talking in abstractions and theories and stuff like that, good luck with that.
I did that, go ahead.
Yeah.
I'd like to direct respond.
Sure.
I would love to call in the concept of imagination. I think it was Ursula Le Guin who once said, we once imagined the divine right of kings was inevitable. And that, like, when you really boil it down, every economic system we've ever lived in was the product of someone's imagination. And we can imagine something else, and we can step into that. And, you know, you mentioned, we think about economy, right? It's this big, elusive term that seems like it has power over all of us. But when you break it down, economy just means the management of home. How we manage our homes is like very tangible, and it can be changed and redeveloped. And when that scales, right, we have an economy. And you mentioned 62% of our revenue goes to military, our tax revenue. And that's true because we live in a banks and tanks economy. We live in an extractive economy. What we're experiencing in divestment in our communities is still part of that same system of violence and war that is part of an economic system that is exploitive. And there is another economic system that we are building that is not intangible, and that's a regenerative economy. We're seeing co-ops, we're seeing land trusts, we're seeing community control. These are not new concepts, these are ancient concepts that we're before capitalism, and we're thriving, and these are things that have been happening the whole time. So I think that we need to imagine the ways, no system has ever been built without someone imagining it first. right? And if we can come together, and what I'm calling into practice right now is called a just transition framework. You can look it up. It was built by Movement Generation, and it shows how all of these pieces of organizing, of policy, of capital, of culture, of labor can work together to divest from a system that's killing us and invest in a system that can support life and that can, we're facing a lot of impending crisis and chaos, and there are ways that we can counter that by making choices collaboratively and together. And the thing that I love about cooperatives is folks often come to me and they're like, oh, businesses, they're capitalist is bad, money is bad. It's like, no, these are tools, and we can use these tools differently, and we can use the market, and we can be market operators in ways that bring in revenue, and with revenue and control of money is power to put our communities back in power. Our communities that were divested from, we had power, and it's time that we take it back, and we need to take back control of the economy that we have built.
I just want to jump in too, because I think Pastor George brought up a really big disconnect of we are imagining, we're doing it in this room, people came to this conference, this is what we're trying to do, right? But I think also Councilwoman Kim said it too, there's a disconnect with the tangible reality, lived experience that community is living right now. They're trying to pay their bills, they're trying to make sure their heat is on, their direct needs need to be met, and I think these models that you're talking about have been supported by social movements for the longest time, but they had a both hand of direct service and trying to pull people up at the same time, because they're not going to be able to focus on this work without having their needs met. And so I think that's the reason people like the Black Panthers were doing all this radical movement, but they at the same time were building the structure and the framework for our social welfare system, right? Because they knew that in order for us to get our brothers and sisters to do this work, they also need to eat. They also need to have a place to lay their head, right? And so I just want to highlight that, because I think that that's been brought up, but I don't want us to not understand the tangible reality that some people just aren't there yet to do this work because they physically, mentally, emotionally, financially cannot be. And so what are we doing about that, right? So I just wanted to bring that up. And sorry, let me interject, but Kim, go ahead.
That was perfect. That was perfect, because our time, our talents, and what we have to offer this movement are worth something.
Yeah.
And so it is not enough for people to say to us, come to the table, or for us to go to the table. We have to learn to negotiate and say, when I get to that table, this is what you need to give me in order to sustain my service. Right? And so I can tell you, even inside of this government, and I'm going to tell you, and this is and maybe it's the truth from Kim's perspective, but this government cares only about itself and sustaining itself, right? We have people who are in office. I don't know all of the logistics of Common Council here in Buffalo, but I can tell you that in Rochester, our city council is primarily Black. And they will tell you, we come from poverty, we know Blackness. But when it comes time to the solutions, and when people are showing up, hurt, frustrated, and angry at Speak to Council, they're taking it personal. Like, I don't have time for these attacks. It's like, are you freaking kidding me? And so we all, and I like to tell folks, if you have time, $5 of discretionary income that you can use for transportation every week, and talents, you have power and something to negotiate. Because right now in government, they have people, maybe they were once in poverty, and I like saying they, even though I'm like all in it with them. So even though they may have come from poverty, none of us in council are poor anymore, right? The truth of it is that we are middle class, and we cannot apply middle-class solutions to poverty problems. And we are building a government. Now remember, you pay your officials. And like I don't know about you, but I work at Vocal, and I will do anything to keep my job. Because I love my job. Well, your elected officials love their job. And they want to be heroes and produce. And so they want to be in charge of all of these solutions. So in Rochester, we're really working on trying to change that. First, me and 3 other colleagues voted no on our mayor's budget that incited Andrea's We voted no on the mayor's budget because equity is not a word that you write on a piece of paper. People do not get equity as much as they say they do not get it. They say this budget is equitable. Equality, which this country is still struggling to embrace, we are not there. And equality, we went through Jim Crow, separate but equal. So equality just means I'm giving you some, I'm giving you some, I'm giving you some. That is not equity. Equity is when you set a standard and give everyone that they need what they need to meet that standard, which means some people may end up getting more than others. And that is hard for a community to embrace because someone is going to be left out a little bit, but guess what? I come from a community where we have been left out for generations. And it is time for justice. So in Rochester, thank God for people who came to speak to council that I said, you gotta show up angry and talk about it, use their voice, went into the mayor. And in this budget, even though I voted no, kind of lied. It was like, if I put participatory budgeting in the budget, will you vote yes? I said, maybe. No. But we did get participatory budgeting. And participatory budgeting, now we're pushing for that to happen in our low-income communities, where you go into the community and the community tell you what they need. And then we who work for the community then take those ideas and turn them into a documented policy. And that power is all over Buffalo because I know you didn't see this call out, but I know that PPG has like their 10 priorities, that's like an amazing event. Like imagine if one of the priorities was in the PPG to fight for some millions of dollars. Buffalo is getting anti-poverty money just like Rochester is. Wouldn't it be wonderful to fight as a community? We demand council participatory budgeting so we can tell you what we need and how to spend our money. Because we're tired of investing in an economy that does not invest in us.
Aaron, I want to give you the chance to respond. I want you to talk a little bit about the tangible reality of the workplace right now for workers. Why are we seeing that we aren't seeing participatory processes? Why are people maybe not able to come to the table? What are the current tangible reality of workers now and their rights?
So many problems, so many things. I mean, like Tori said, and everyone has said, like, especially when you walk into the workplace, democracy, we are not in a democracy anymore. Everyone needs to have their basic needs met, period, full stop, no matter what you do, no matter who you are. Everyone should have the right and opportunity to thrive. And importantly, no one, no entity, no person, no business should have the right or ability to thrive off the backs of others who themselves are not thriving. And so in my most recent research, I've looked at a bunch of different groups of workers who don't even count as workers under the law. They don't get the minimum wage. They don't have the right to organize and bargain collectively. They don't get a union. They aren't protected by anti-discrimination statutes. They don't have the right to a safe workplace. And so while we strengthen our our social and economic safety net for people who are already workers and are already in incredibly precarious positions, right? Stringing together gig jobs or what have you, barely making ends meet. We also need to bring all the other people who are doing productive labor for the revenue of other entities but are excluded from those basic rights. So I've looked at, and I'll be real brief, I've looked at incarcerated workers, people who are working behind bars, generating incredible economic value, but get pennies if that. Workfare workers, people who are compelled to labor in order to get basic levels of public assistance, but don't get paid for it. Also, more recently, I've been interviewing people who, poor people who go to addiction rehabs. They're struggling with addiction. They have nowhere to turn because we don't provide any services. They got nothing, nowhere to go. They end up in these places, and I'll call it out, including the Salvation Army, where they are in a rehab, but they have to work 40 hours a week for free in exchange for what they call treatment. But the work is their treatment. They call it work therapy. And these folks, they call it work therapy. They get room and board off of donations, but they're working for free and they're running the thrift store enterprise. Salvation Army thrift stores are run off the backs of these people's labor, and they're not paid for it. So we need to bring, and there are more, right? This isn't all. All of these people who are workers providing productive labor, generating value for other people and not themselves, and yet they remain excluded from our basic social and economic safety net.
Absolutely, and I would be remiss not to mention this New York Immigration Coalition undocumented workers
Yes.
as well.
Yes,
Especially
workers,
in New York State, yes. Our farm economy, apples, you know, the Apple, New York State, Empire State, all that, undocumented workers, right? No protections whatsoever, abhorrent living conditions, just terrible, terrible conditions. And this is the back of our economy, right? These are the backs of our economy. And so it's really important for us to be considering everyone in the system, whether they have citizenship or not. And I always have to bring that up into these conversations because I think a lot of the times we talk about our civic duty and different things as U.S. citizens, as residents, but there's a large shadow population, even in formerly incarcerated people who cannot participate in the civic system in the same way that we can, that it's really important that we don't forget their perspective, we don't forget their realities, and we don't forget their rights. So I just want to highlight that as well. I want us to keep going in this conversation of what we are doing to then reimagine and make sure we are including these voices. I'm really curious, specifically, Tori, if you can talk about what the model of a co-op is. Obviously, you mentioned some of the success in Buffalo, but how can people tangibly, if they are visiting from Rochester or other places, we have some people from other areas, be implementing these types of models into their neighborhoods, into their economies, into their local spheres of influence?
So right now, there's actually really growing infrastructure and technical support for folks who want to start a worker-owned business. There are local and regional organizations such as Cooperation Buffalo, which has worked in Rochester before, and I do know that the previous mayor, Lovely Warren, was a big champion of worker co-ops and invested in worker co-ops. And there's a number of also national organizations such as the U.S. Federation of Worker Cooperatives that provides direct technical assistance and support for worker-owned businesses, as well as capital organizations that Cooperation Buffalo is a part of called Seed Commons, which provides seed capital to worker-owned businesses that is what's called non-extractive patient capital, meaning when you go to a bank, right, and you ask for a loan, you ask for a business loan, they want to know, like, well, what collateral do you have? So if this loan goes under, can I take your house? What credit do you have? Can I trust you with this money? And you need to start paying it back immediately, whether or not that business is profitable yet. So that's extractive capital. The model of capital we work with works in you don't need to have a personal guarantee. You don't need to have credit. Your personal assets are never ever on the line, and you do not pay back that capital until your business is profitable, and you are only paying a portion of the profit. So that is still building wealth. And I think what's important about Seed Commons is we are not investing in the white tech rows that were mentioned earlier, right? We're investing in folks who are excluded from the economy, who are excluded from access to traditional capital. We're working, that includes folks who have varying types of immigration status. That includes folks who are formally incarcerated. That includes, folks who are frontline workers who have been living paycheck to paycheck doing low-wage labor. So we're making sure, and that also includes businesses that are working, that are green, that are working towards restoration of arts and culture and care. So we're making sure that we are leveraging capital nationally, that's being fundraised nationally, into our communities that are really trying to grow economic opportunity about the people who we're talking about, the people who are the backbone of the economy, who've been exploited, and now need to be put in control of capital, in control of business, and in control of the self-determination of their own lives, so they can put their kids in daycare, so they can put food on their table. These are basic human rights, and this is one strategy that there is growing national support to advance.
Councilor George, I did want to ask you about the Buffalo Center for Health Equity has been working with young people lately and focusing a lot on young people with some of your initiatives. You guys work on my food access, community engagement, community education, all of these different types of things. It's really such a revolutionary type of organization that's directly targeting health disparities specifically for our Black community. I just want you to talk about that a little bit with the crowd, some of the work that you all are doing to meet those, like we said, immediate needs, but also incorporating education into that, and how does that type of work work?
That's a big question.
It is.
So let me just kind of real briefly. So it's our belief that this is a human rights type of thing, right? Every human being has the right. They have a right to be healthy, right? That's and we know that right has been stripped from many people of African descent since the inception and the creation of this republic, right? And so we're pushing against a historical traumatic event. I like to categorize America as a big crime scene, right? And we're trying to rectify a crime that was committed against humanity. And so the systems that exist now here in America keep people of African descent in some really dire situations. And so, for example, if you think about education, education is one of the tools that you're able to use in order to move upward in your economic situation, right? And Malcolm X, talked about education being a passport to your liberation. And so, and you think about how historically this country has made it illegal, quite frankly, even before the creation of the Constitution, to educate people of African descent. Well, this miseducation is still continuing right now, right? And when you see in the Buffalo Public Schools, and it's not a hit at the Buffalo Public Schools, these are just facts, that only 20% of African American children are at reading level right now. 20%. We have whole schools where not one African American child will pass the standardized test. Entire school. And the same is true with mathematics. So now you understand that lack of education is a real obstacle for that child to succeed. And then you look at where the lived environment of this child, oftentimes, not all the time, but we know that there's serious housing problems here in the city of Buffalo, and through the work of Dr. Henry Taylor, we have it documented that there's a large percentage of people in the African American community who are living in substandard housing, but yet paying 50 to 60% of their income on that. So now that child is placed in that environment, right? And we wonder why that child is not succeeding. And then you look at the employment opportunities or lack thereof of their parents, right? And many people who are in poverty work every day. So it's not just, well, they should get a job. A lot of people have jobs, right? But they're not being paid a living wage, right? And then you will further on and understand that the air and water quality in many of these communities are substandard. That's why we have a project that we're working with the EPA to look at air quality on the east side, right? And then you move further on about access to healthy food, right? And so it's one thing to put a supermarket or put a venue in a community, but what if people don't have the resources in order to purchase this healthy food? So this whole kind of ecosystem contributes to a culture of sickness within our community. To answer your question, what we're doing is trying to raise awareness and get that help people understand that this is why these health outcomes are the way they are. We believe that, and we put about 20% of our budget into community engagement, because we believe that the public, the people, understand what their issues are, and they understand how to solve those problems. However, we don't spend enough time in actively engaged, and I'm talking about going deeper than just having one town hall meeting, or have some consultants come into a community center with a preconceived notion of what people think they ought to be saying, and try to fit the conversation into some kind of a nice little SWOT analysis or whatever, and people maybe just want to talk and share their stories, and I don't know how this answers your question, but this is my experience, so let me just say what's on my mind, and not tell people, well, that's not what we're talking about tonight. Well, that's my life experience, and I need to have a space to be able to do that. We just recently had a conference where we had over 100 young people to have a conversation about gun violence. And it's deeper than just having gun laws. It's about the trauma that's attached to being a witness to an act of violence committed with a gun, right? And these young people had some brilliant ideas on how to change that culture of violence, right? That they're surrounded by. We know a lot of our young people have witnessed acts of violence at a level higher than troops in combat. This is all documented. So we're, to answer your question, we're having conversations to try to build a kind of community movement that will help us find meaningful solutions. We want to cut across sector. We want to cut across ethnicity, right? We have corporate partners. The meeting I had at 8 o'clock this morning was with 2 CEOs in this community, who they're trying to figure out, they're not bad human beings, but they got their boards and bottom line stuff. And so we got to figure out a way to have conversations and communicate and with folks like that, because there's a level where they want to have, right? And so our work is about engaging the community to get a better understanding, to understanding the levels of power, and to understand that you cannot solve one problem while ignoring the other. So you'll never get to the point of health equity unless you start talking about economic equity, educational equity, housing equity. They're all connected. So there's nothing, hiring a DEI officer in your company is not gonna bring health equity to Buffalo. Right? And so that's what our work is, to try to raise that awareness and provide leadership on that the best way that we possibly can. And we do feed people, we do the proverbial stuff that you gotta do on a day-to-day basis, but we're looking more at kind of policy and things of that nature.
Absolutely. And so I think all of the work you all are doing, we keep throwing on the first equity. You even started bringing up the word, the nomenclature of DEI. And so I want to talk about the current political state we're in, right? We've seen this historical shift and even a bastardization or perversion of social movements nomenclature, like DEI, like woke, like equality, like critical race theory, even the word democracy itself. And so what truly are you all, and I want to include myself, we all working for in terms of what is true democracy, what is true equality, what is justice? Not what's in the news right now, not what Fox News is talking about, not all of those things, right? How are we upholding and maintaining? Because maintaining I think is the most important piece, because there's a disinvestment that comes with that organization. They're defunding things. They're not, they're trying to outlaw DEI. They're trying to outlaw all of the work that you all are doing. And so how do we encourage sustainability for this work and keep it going? Because it's so necessary. I don't know if you all have dealt with some of those barriers with this current political state and how you're dealing with that. How is that? I just am so curious on how you can do work like this in this current political climate.
I can tell you what we're doing at Vocal New York is not only are we building leadership, we are building a just democracy within the leadership. So when we talk about ending homelessness, mass incarceration, the war on drugs, we actually go to the places where folks are congregating that are directly impacted by this. So current opioid users, previous opioid users, and people living in shelters. To us, these are the people who have the real power because they know exactly what they need to get out of that situation. They just don't always have the perspective or the political perspective to put it into. So what we are doing is we are organizing people, and as we organize, we are building their leadership. So in our C4, as a political director, I run our C4, I'm teaching our people like Robert's rules, what voting looks like. So when you step into a city council meeting, you know exactly what is happening, right? And so providing all of that, but what is exciting for all of us is the end result. The end result is we are looking for strong co-governance. Vocal New York, given the nature of who we organize, like I am here front and center now, if we had our directly impacted leaders in this room, I would be in the back or out there, because when they show up, I step back, right? And so with our leaders who are directly impacted are actually endorsing candidates. So candidates, and we recently endorsed April Baskins, will be here in July, really hitting the ground for her. So with our leaders, when they are endorsing a candidate and they are asking a candidate, how do you feel about this homeless crisis? And that candidate does not answer properly, our leaders are coming back with, do you know I'm living in a shelter? And do you know what harm you are causing me based on your ideology? So they are being just that direct. I'm sitting there going, this is true. And then everyone that we endorse, right? Because if we endorse you, it is because you are truly grassroots, ready for the movement, wanting to be with the people, and we don't want you to come into the establishment and lose that, because at the end of the day, being an elected official is still a job. People do not want to lose their salary. And so sometimes they bend towards the establishment. So we're coming in, really trying to support our elected officials so that they can feel strong enough to support a just democracy, to support social justice when they stay in office. So we are really creating co-governance spaces, right? So when you have constituents in your within whichever area you are residing over, and they are pushing back on, say, a safe consumption space, let our leaders come in, hold a town hall on your behalf, and educate your community. Let our leaders come in and do door knocking for you, but as we are on the ground for you, we expect you to speak up in chambers and in all of these places, because we're watching. And so a lot of us don't understand understand or believe that we have that level of power. But like I said, if you are a registered voter,
Yes.
if you have time, and if you just show up, you have power.
This right-wing movement, it taps off at about 30%, right? And I mean, that's kind of like the threshold of this whole Trump group or whatever the heck these folks are. And when you look at most of the data, it's about 30%. So I'm not a math scholar, but you know, I passed math when I was in school. And I mean, if we just get our people to the out,
That's it.
get them registered, we'll wipe the floor with these people. But people, we gotta be smart about this, you know? And I know people talk about, well, we're not gonna vote this. I mean, people have, that's their own personal choice, but understand this, it's like going into the battle without any weapons. So if you feel like, you know, the fight for freedom, liberation, and equality for people who are marginalized, and if you go into that fight, I believe you should go into that fight with every tool, everything that's available to you. Everything. And I think it's not wise to leave some armor or tools at the wayside. I think it's a mistake. And I think the potential, I'm not trying to scare people, but I get a chance to go to Washington from time to time. And if folks don't really understand what these people are getting ready to try to do, they're trying to wipe out a lot of the, Washington kind of runs a lot on professional, like, policy people, right? You know, the people that just kind of, they're gonna be in the Department of Agriculture whether it's a Democrat or a Republican. They're just like, those are the people that kind of run the country, right? But this guy's talking about eliminating that and making almost every federal employee a presidential appointment. We know this, right? We don't.
Yeah.
And these things, the kind of structural changes that this guy and his folks are putting on the table will fundamentally impact this country for generations. And if we don't think, if we just, oh, there's no difference between the two, please, think deeper. Think deeper. And so we have to participate. We got to participate. My grandfathers, you get the whole story. I know young people like roll their eyes about this, but my grandfathers worked as day workers and whatever in the South, and they never had the opportunity to vote. And they were in Virginia and in Georgia. My grandmother, cleaned dormitories in Emory University in Atlanta, Georgia, and risked her life trying to vote. And so, I'm not going to insult my ancestors by not engaging in a process that, as an American citizen, I have every right to. And while I have issues with people, whatever, but you gotta engage, you gotta participate, because if we don't, we're just making the status quo stronger. And that's just bottom line. I know some people don't like it. I got huge issues about Palestine and all the other stuff. And, I get it. I have friends that live in Palestine, right? I get it. But what do you think this other guy gonna do?
We've seen it.
And so, and it's our government. We have the right to this. I pay taxes. Anybody pay taxes?
Too much.
Yeah. So I'm not giving that power. I'm not giving that over to somebody to people who hate everything that I stand for. Hate my mere existence. Do you realize these people would not want people of color to even exist in this republic? Do we understand this level of hatred and vitriol? And so we have a moral obligation for ourselves and for those who come behind us and those who came before us to engage in, and I use the word fight. This is a fight. And we need to be able to have that mentality that we're in the fight for our freedom and our liberation.
Amen.
Pastor George, I really love what you're saying, right? Like, we don't need everybody. Like, 30% and this whole political landscape has shifted. It doesn't take everybody at the table. And I think when we think about like how to build political power, yes, we need to vote. Yes, we need to run for office. We need to be controlling and taking back control of the narrative. Like, there's a reason they're trying to ban TikTok. It's because they've lost control of the narrative, and very much because of the generation in this room that is seeing the truth and communicating and building the narrative. So something I want to kind of bring into the space too is like, what are we doing? Like some of the strategies for that. One of the things that we're doing is I used to work on a program where we went into communities and we saw what folks were building on the ground in the grassroots, and we said, hey, these folks need to be spokespeople for their own work. They need to be able to tell their own story of how they're being impacted, the issues they're facing, and the solutions that they're building. So we ran a program that helped folks become spokespeople for their work. At the same time, we ran another program organizing journalists and saying, hey, do you know about participatory budgeting? Do you know about municipal fiber? Do you know about worker ownerships? Let's train you up on some of these beats and match you with those folks so you can start publishing some of these stories. So suddenly we see things in the media, in the news. Then we go with a program called Employee Ownership Cities, and we start fellowship programs with municipal leaders being say, hey, do you know what's happening over here? Like, let's start a fellowship. Let's look at how participatory budgeting is happening in this community. Let's look at how what happens when cities invest in worker ownership, how that changes people's real lives. Let's discuss strategies that we can be in relationship as electeds who are accountable to our constituents to put these things into action. So by changing the narrative, by dismissing the false solutions and uplifting the real ones, by putting folks who have power, who are working in media, who are working in office, in relationship with folks on the ground, like we can build a lot while we're voting, while we're running for office, in between election cycles. Like that power, that fight, it needs to happen every day through so many different strategies. And the power that we hold, like just through our phones, I think is not something to also be taken lightly.
I just wanted to mention one quick thing about voting that I didn't know early on, because I was once a low propensity voter. The system has not done anything for me. I'm not gonna vote to put people in office for them to do nothing for me. But a couple of truths that I learned, and it really has swayed some of our folks, because how many police-related shootings and murders have happened with our people, and how many of them have gotten off and found not guilty. And a lot of that is because we don't stack the jurors. And being a registered voter, a consistent voter, is a part of the selection for jury. And so a lot of us folks do not sit on juries or are even, because not voting, not registered voters. And for some of our folks, some of the folks that we organize, that's been enough to make the move.
I didn't even know that, so that just stirred up something to me personally, and I do vote, but I'm like, oh my God, now I gotta tell everybody that. I want to open it up also for the audience to be able to ask some questions. Okay, all right. Go
And I
ahead.
want to just commend you because you're doing a fantastic job as a moderator. So please forgive me, this morning, I asked a question that was deemed very inappropriate for a public answer. And so I'm going for one for you. So if it's inappropriate, then so be it. My question is that we're in a room with a mixed crowd, but we have a good amount of white people here. And there's something that I'd like to address or speak to you about your approach in connecting with our white counterparts, and really bringing them into the fight with us. Erin, you said you're in West Africa and you've seen the women doing the work, and so you connected to the humanity. And what I'm hoping you all can give me is a perspective of how do we shift through some of the people that are here for pomp and circumstance? How do we shift through the people that are here because they're being paid? How do we shift through the people that are here because they've seen their mothers and their fathers fight for the Underground Railroad slaves, and they really understand the humanity that connects us all? Because I struggle with it a little bit because it's hard to understand inclusion unless you've been excluded. So how do we speak to our white counterparts to really get them to understand that this is really important? We really got to do this so that the whole body works. And it's really no question, but just what is your approach been?
That's a great question also, so thank you for asking, and to say that first.
Addressing me specifically, I think it's really hard. I think, I am a sociology teacher, and a lot of what we do in sociology is trying to, there's this thing called the sociological imagination, and it's basically trying to understand someone else's perspective by walking in their shoes, but we can't ever walk in someone else's shoes. We don't ever know what someone else has been through. So the best that we can do is walk alongside in a multitude of ways, whatever that means. It may begin by reading in a college classroom, right? But it is a process of learning. I do think that everyone can connect in some way to feeling excluded or something. I think there are human bonds that we can find, but they're hard. And I don't have any answers, but I think that the start is learning and being open and really stepping back from believing that you can fully understand and fully walk in someone else's shoes, and just start to open your eyes and ears and learn from.
Go ahead, back there.
I have a response to what you said. I think, as I've worked with a lot of diverse populations myself, I think when it comes to me, relating to white people and other groups of color that maybe haven't had the same experience as Black people, I've had to take that same approach and remember that I can't understand their lifestyle either, so I won't be able to teach to you in the way that you'll be able to understand your lived experience, because I don't understand it either. I only understand the need to be included because I've always been excluded. So I can't talk to you about what it's like to be in the majority and to want to step out and help other people. I can't talk to that except for from my position. So that's something that I really had to learn to understand about myself before putting myself in a space where now I have to answer to people who already don't necessarily believe what I believe, but now knowing that they don't have the same upbringing that I do.
Thank you so much. You guys have strength, go ahead.
I wanted to direct respond as this feels like a very weird question to answer when I recognize I'm a white person sitting on a panel in the front of the room, right? And I also tried to not be in that situation, but here we are. But something that I've had to do within myself and also do within my communities is encourage people to sit down, step back, shut up, don't be the executive director, don't be on that board, give up your power and turn it over and follow Black leadership. Leverage the resources that you have access to in service of, but don't be in decision-making power. Don't be don't like distribute and delegate and step back and listen really hard and listen without question, because there are so many experiences that I will not relate to, and there are so many times I'm gonna mess up and I'm gonna step on toes, and I need to like repair and be humble and step way back. And that is learning, but that's also relationship, and it's also accountability, and it's also like doing like internal work like in our own communities in our own time, and just like recognizing like that this is not for us, but it benefits all of us, right? And we are all harmed by patriarchy, capitalism, white supremacy, and we all benefit from those systems having less power over our lives. And the folks who are like closest to the harm are best equipped to like, and most deserving of the support to be resourced to facilitate like the ending of those systems.
Yeah, and I think it takes courage. It takes courage on both sides. Because for me, like when I talk about what we need to build and create this movement, when we talk about time and at least $5, white people have that. Right? More than some of us who are really fighting for our basic needs and our lives out in these streets. Right? And so we have white people who have time. And so in my organizing, I come across a lot of white people who want to help. But I have enough courage, and I also invite the white people who I want to organize with to have enough courage to talk to me. Why are you here? Is this a part of your job description? And if it is, say that. How can your job bring resources to the movement? Right? If you're here because you believe this, you know, and because you live this and you want this, let's talk about how to work together. But when I say courage, as Black people, as especially a Black woman, we have to have the courage to know when it is not time to measure pain. Right? My pain is more than yours, and you're white, and so I need you to sit down and be quiet. Right? But some organizers are there, but I'm the organizer. You're not going to put me in a space and have me do all the work. If this is hard for you, don't sit there and go, Kim, you know, I'm gonna respect you. And so I'm gonna step back. No, you're not. It is labor intensive to show up and be in my feelings all the time. You want to be in this movement with me? If this movement or this world hurts you, step up and say it. Stand with me and let's feel it together. But don't make me bear the burden of the entire thing.
Focus has to be on the work. Right. And I hate to be insensitive, but if with white colleagues and stuff, if there's certain things that make you uncomfortable, I can live with that. So, I mean, you know what I mean? It's not going to dictate how we approach something. If this is what we believe, if this is the path that we have chosen to do what we got to do, this is what we're doing. Now, if you can't do that, if that's upsetting to you, it makes you feel whatever, you got to deal with that. But you're not gonna make that my issue. I got enough issues. You know what I mean? I'm trying to figure out how I'm feeling about stuff. I can't take on the burden about how you feeling about something. You know, and if you can't do that, I still love you. But you're not gonna dictate the pace or the strategy or when or how and what we're going to do. If you're going to be part of it, just follow the leadership of folks with the lived experience. And if you can't do that, that's cool. Right? But I don't need to see you cry about it. And I don't need a 3-page email about why you couldn't come. And I don't have time for that. And so we just gotta, and it sounds harsh, it's ruthless, but
frustrating.
There are people out there that are depending on people like us to fight for them. And we can't waste our energy on stuff that sounds mean, but I guess it is.
I'm gonna make a jump around the room. Give me a second. Over here, I already promised you.
George, I don't disagree with you, but let me say this. I've been doing this a long time. In the healthcare, in and out of the healthcare field, talking to folks that are in the political world, all of that. I look at you, Kim, because I think that you're an exception and not the rule of coming from where you came from to where you are today. I think that education is the bottom line to what each and every one of you have already said. Take out democracy and take out small business and all this other stuff. Until we make a vested interest in our children so they're prepared to step into these roles that we're talking about. Here's our problem with workforce development right now. Everybody's talking about preparing our older, younger people, if you know what I mean, our late teens, our early 20s people for jobs. What we haven't done, they're talking about social skills and all the stuff you need to do, show up on time and all that. We've put the cart before the horse. We have young people, and George mentioned it earlier, but I want to re-emphasize it, that are in a 7th grade classroom reading the 2nd grade level. They're not going to even get to job-ready preparedness. And in healthcare, we have a terrible outcomes of our health system. We also are not prepared to bring people forth to run our healthcare industry. Doctors, you tell little kids, oh, you want to be a doctor? The reality is chemistry, physics, you can't read. So I appreciate all the stuff y'all talk about today, but you gotta step back and start thinking about how we're going to, after we're gone, what are we leaving? My big thing is leave it better than you found it.
Yes.
That's the job. The job isn't today. Job isn't you doing what you're doing and coming to these things and sitting at the desk and get your paycheck. I get that. What we have to start doing is thinking about what's gonna happen when we aren't leading it anymore, okay? And the other piece I wanna make very clear is what we don't talk about is new Americans. So what we've been talking about is black and white. Everything George talked about in my mind is about black and white. But let me just tell you what's happening is all of these places in Buffalo, if you didn't know, it is the 3rd largest port for immigrants. So we have all these new people we are not prepared to deal with. Dialect, linguistics, culture, economics, and they're going to make up a significant number of the people. So guess what, black people? You about to take another back seat to the other brown people. So now the conversation isn't about black and white, it's about black and brown. Somewhere we're mixed into brown now. We used to be all about the brown. So what we gotta start thinking about is how are we preparing our systems for the people coming after us? And we gotta stop talking about today, because today is only as long as 24 hours. What's gonna be the next 24 hours? So I think there has to be more Kims of the world, but advocacy is a skill. That's one of the things I love so much about partnership. Because what the Partnership for Good teaches you is how to do that. And we don't know as people how to do that. We know what our own personal struggle is and we can tell our own story. But the bigger story to tell is collective story. But we gotta bring other people. People talk about how they talk to white people. You better figure out how to talk to Somalians and all these other people. Because collectively is how our change is going to happen. It's not gonna change the black people, it's not gonna change the white people. It's gotta change collectively now because we're truly the melting pot that we never were.
Absolutely.
We're there now. So I'd love to have conversations about going forward, what we're gonna do about that. But remember, our young people in our educational system is terrible.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Question. How are we receiving the immigrants, right? Like, what have you seen in Buffalo with the black community? How we are receiving them? And Because I haven't delved enough into this issue, to be honest with you, but it sounds like you have. So that's my question for you.
Okay, my answer to you is, first of all, I will say that you're not alone. That in all industries, all systems, none of us are prepared or ready. The other thing I'll tell you about specific about how, and again, this goes back, and I feel your pain because I don't know all black people. But I can tell you that the people that I know that live in the communities that are less likely to get services, we call that the Buffalo's East Side. What they think about immigrants is they taking our housing. They opening up the corner stores. So guess what, black people? You better stop. You got an empty storefront on your corner for 10 years. You could have got a small business loan, yada, 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 right? Here comes the immigrants. They just took over the store, fixed it up, selling it. Well, you don't like the fact that they spend you gotta spend $4 on a loaf of bread, but oh well. Okay? So now you say, they took our store and what store? You didn't have a store for 10 years. So black people, guess what? We can't just keep saying it's all them and not us. In this whole gun thing, we killing our own people. How is that possible? So we don't have to worry about the other people taking us out. Okay, so this idea of the 30% that's gonna change the paradigm shift of our politics. Really? We gotta start thinking about is really people going to do what we want them to do?
That.
Yeah, but my thing about I think about stepping up is my point. Yeah, stepping up. I'm talking about stepping up, right? Which goes back to voting. But to your point about what do they think about us? They see more of them and they're taking opportunity. I ain't mad at them. They're taking opportunity. Now you can argue about, whether they're supposed to be here and immigration and all that. But the other piece of that, they can stop the border all they want to. People are still gonna come here. We say, but you're tired and all that. That's what the Statue of Liberty says, right? So now you wanna. So just think about that.
I'm sorry. We started 18 minutes late, so I'm gonna take some liberty and go 7 minutes over. I'm sorry. This gentleman in the back, I'm sorry, you've been waiting for a long time. Go ahead.
Hi, I'm Jim Gordon. I'm treasurer for Citizens for Regional Transit. I want to address the pastor's health outcomes. In the city of Buffalo, we have a section of highway called the Kensington Expressway, which is partially depressed, the way the inner loop used to be in Rochester.
Gentrification.
Rochester, you guys got the governor to go along with to fill it in. Yes, it's gentrification because you wanted to fill it in and you got a mixed-use housing. Buffalo wants to fill it in and get a park and a parkway, so it isn't going to be a direct economic development. There is a steamroller running right now. Our organization last Friday, coupled with three additional PPG partners, the Western New York Youth Climate, I get it's a long acronym, but anyway, the Western New York Youth Climate Action people, the Coalition for Economic Justice, Buffalo Transit Riders, along with 3 other lawsuits filed against the New York State Department of Transportation that is deliberately keeping that expressway open, and they want to maintain it, even though that expressway, the people who live on either the east side or the west side of it, within blocks of it, are in the 1% percentile for the lowest life expectancy in the United States, the highest rate of asthma and breathing disorders, and in the top 10% for a whole host of other things, cancers and you name it, and they're there.
And you're calling for the removal of this, right? Correct?
We want the expressway removed, put the park and the parkway and the trees that will give you life, breathing air and clean the air, instead of pollutants that are literally killing the people who are mostly black in that neighborhood. So,
You want Pastor George's support in that? I'm sorry, I just want to make sure we.
No, I'm trying
Uplifting.
to address the
Yeah.
issues that you guys are talking about. How do you organize? Well, in this case, we look at this as an emergency.
Yeah.
You filed on the very last day that you can possibly file. Getting lawyers and organizing, that is a real thing, and we were able to do it.
Yeah.
And if it wasn't for PPG and people like everybody in this room, we wouldn't be able to have that strength. So I just wanted to make people aware of it, and
Thank
hopefully you guys will follow it. Maybe go to court cases, and when it comes to court, there's something coming up August 6th, but we don't know what place and time yet. So it's a lot of work.
Okay. All right, young lady, I'm sorry. I wanted you to be able to speak on the young lady. Be able to.
Yeah, I just had a question, just based on your guys' backgrounds. Like, my research at school is about incarcerated people and like the medical system in prisons, and so I was wondering, like, specifically about the kind of intersection of incarceration and health equity, and anyone who wants to speak on that. I just am trying to learn more about it and would love to hear some experts talk about it.
Yeah, I mean, there is a definite intersection of why people are incarcerated in the first place, right? For the related to the social determinants of health. When folks are incarcerated, they're not exposed to an environment that's going to promote good health. And then once folks get out, the stigma of being, an ex-offender is also going to contribute to all that. So, I mean, the high imprisonment of people of color is a byproduct of an unjust system. It's the same system that fuels these poor health outcomes. But it's something I'll look more closely at, and I'm interested to see what your research has shown. Sam, if you could connect with Sam over here, because I'd like to see what you've come up with of your information to see how we can integrate that into the work that we're doing.
And
Appreciate
there's
it.
an opportunity to speak to these speakers at lunch too, so I don't want you to think you can only ask your questions here. So just want to say that. I want to get you to lunch. You wanted to respond really quick?
Yeah, look up the bill on elder parole, because a lot of health inequities are in there, because a lot of our older folks are dying in prison. And there's an actual bill that.
I just want to say, to the point of people have to be brave enough to run. We have somebody who has indeed run, who wants to just take a fast
Okay, that was not what I thought was going to happen. Hi, everyone. My name is Catherine Franco. I have to say that it's really encouraging being in this space for the last couple of days. Councilwoman Kim Smith, thank you so much. You are very inspiring for me, even though I have ran a couple times. It is great to hear somebody sort of championing the things that we have been trying to bring here in Buffalo, that we have talked about here in Buffalo, that we are hearing about at this conference today. I just felt that I really needed to speak, though, quickly. I needed to respond very, very quickly to what I heard this gentleman say over here. So talking about sort of what we're seeing with new Americans coming in, what we're seeing here in Buffalo is we have a huge influx of folks who are coming from New York City, from other places outside of Buffalo, that are taking advantage of what we've seen as a depressed sort of neighborhood on the east side of Buffalo. What I think is really unfortunate, though, to think about folks taking opportunity that Black folks have not taken, is that opportunity did not exist for Black folks, right? We have the study that came out from Dr. Henry Louis Taylor that has now come out 30 years later that has shown that Black folks in Buffalo on the east side have actually not had the opportunity, that we have seen systemic policies like redlining that have continued to persist, continue to shape our neighborhoods. And so I think that argument is really harmful when we talk about what is happening on the east side, and when we talk about Black folks in particular, which we talk about Black and white. Let me tell you, Black folks are the people who have yet to be able to overcome what has happened to them in terms of policy, in terms of the way in which we treat them here in America. And Buffalo is a place where we we see it happen, when we talk about the segregation, when we talk about the poverty, we are seeing what is happening across our nation right here, amplified in Buffalo. And so I just wanted to make sure that we are looking at the whole picture, and that this is not individuals' decision making, that these are not individual choices that are happening, that what we see is a culmination of policy, systemic racism, white supremacy in action, and continuing to do what it has wanted to do, which is keep places that have concentrations of Black folks, like the east side of Buffalo, the way that it looks, the way that it is, and I just needed to say that. Thank you.